Assalamu alaikum everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. We'll be continuing as we have been for um, maybe it's been over a year at this point. I've lost count, but um, for a long time we've been studying the 25th word, and which is about the miraculousness of the Quran. And lately we've been studying the third ray within it. Of the third ray, there have been two radiances, one radiance so far that we've covered out of three. And today, inshallah, as you can see in the text, we'll be continuing with the second radiance. So, inshallah, I'll read a little bit, share some of my own thoughts, and then leave the floor open for your comments or questions. And we can see what the text has to offer us today, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Second radiance. This is the Quran's youth. It preserves its freshness and youth, every age as though newly revealed. In fact, the Quran has to have perpetual youth, since as a pre-eternal address, it addresses at once all the levels of mankind in every age. And that is how it has been seen and is seen. Even although all the centuries are different with regard to ideas and capacity, it is though it looks to each particularly and teaches it. The Quran looks to each particular century and teaches it. Man's works and laws grow old like man, they change and are changed. But the rulings and laws of the Quran are so firm and well founded that they increase in strength as the centuries pass. Indeed, this present age and the people of the book this age, who have more than any other relied on themselves and stopped up their ears to the words of the Quran, are so in need of its guiding address of, O people of the book, O people of the book, that it is as if it addresses this age directly, and the phrase, O people of the book, comprises also the meaning of O people of the modern science books. And here is a footnote. So, O people of the book is referred to Ahl al-Kitab, right? And here he is also referring to Ahl al-Maktab, or people who were educated in secular schools. It delivers its shout of, O people of the book, come to common terms as between us and you. And this is from chapter 3, verse 64 of the Quran. O people of the book, come to common terms as between us and you. So the Quran delivers this shout to the ends of the world with all its strength, all its freshness, all its youth. And I'll pause here just briefly before we continue on a bit. So just as a first glance, we see that this second radiance is highlighting another aspect that the third ray is trying to prove, which is, or trying to talk about, which is about how part of what makes the Quran so miraculousness in its exposition is the way in which its age is preserved, in which its youth is preserved in every age. And so the second radiance is explaining to us how at each point in history, perhaps, or each century, it is as though the claim is that it is as though the Quran has just been newly revealed, right? And then it makes another different vein of arguments, which is that, by definition, that the Quran must have this youthfulness to it, this perpetual youthfulness to it, since it is a pre-eternal address. Since it's not an address it is not a speech that is to be located for a specific time or place, but rather one that must provide, that claims to provide guidance for all of humanity, all conscious beings at all times, and that the truths it expresses can't be relative truths. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. Inshallah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And so, as I was saying, there's a necessity of this perpetual youth, and so Nursi continues and says that even though clearly all centuries are different, one can say that the needs of the 21st century are very different from, let's say, the 14th century or the 9th century, and certainly the extent to which technological developments might go about, or the way in which society is organized, the values, morals of society, all of these things, these are things that we can read up on ourselves and kind of confirm easily. And it says, just as the human's works and laws grow old, they change and are changed, but that this change or inevitable change that human laws have within them by virtue of trying to progress towards perfection and needing constant revision. In contrast to that are the sort of firm rulings and laws of the Quran, and the unchanging, perhaps, guidance that it offers. And so it's interesting that, how can a guidance that is unchanging speak to circumstances that are changing? And that is part of, I guess, its comprehensiveness, miraculousness of exposition, and youth, as it's saying. And I feel like all of this is very kind of evident. We see empires rise and fall. Now is the time of the nation state and United Nations and these attempts to have international laws or ways of governing that are deemed to be the best for each people or community. And all of this, whether they're right or whether they're wrong, come from this inherent desire to progress towards perfection. One might think, democracy is the best way to rule. Others are more in line with authoritarianism or what have you. And these might be for personal benefit or for the sake of actual progress. There is that change. We don't see a one size fit all, and there is a constant revision. The idea of amendments to laws, right? There's a constant revision that we see in laws and governance, in just a way that bureaucracy organizes itself. And I guess here, like I'm also speaking in the very I'm speaking in terms of just the rules and laws that we have to abide by. It's not. But if we take it to a different realm, which is that of the sometimes unspoken of or sometimes very blatantly spoken of rules and laws that are dictated to us in terms of values, in terms of lifestyles, in terms of ideologies, of what is the correct ideology to adopt, what is the correct worldview to adopt. Um, and this can be in terms of how I view the world to exist, like how the order in which it exists, right? From science to just what is the best way for a human being to live so as to attain that, you know, perfect happiness that they seek for, that euphoric lifestyle that they seek, um, or the way in which all their needs could be met. There's a constant competition of this, and just one look at um, philosophies in general can show the diversity of thought there, and sometimes not very diverse arena of thought, to be honest, in which everyone is trying to find the best laws for humans to implement, not just politically and morally, but also internally, and um, how to essentially meet the needs that each of us have as human beings. Um, and so, and there's a fickleness to it, or there's a constant change to it that we witness. There's always, even if we look at something as quote unquote basic as just the educational curriculum of a state, let's say the great state of New Jersey, um, there's always going to be, whether this is, every decade or every few decades or every years, a constant change to how people think that an ideal curriculum ought to work, let's say from kindergarten to 12th grade. What sort of state exams there should be, or what should be taught in the classroom at a very basic level. And that change is also a symptom of the fact that we are looking constantly for a sort of ideal way to go about in perfecting ourselves and perfecting the generations to come, and so on. Um, and this change is not seen as a bad thing necessarily, because it highlights the mistakes or errors of those before at times, but it also shows that the inevitability of the change that is also to come when constructed by the human mind and human thought. Um, and these are all just different examples. I would say that my primary need here, if I am to look at the Quran, would be to tell me how to live in a state in which I'm not in pain, right? In which I'm not in agony, in which I'm not in a state of continuous conflict with myself, first and foremost. Um, and then, of course, also conflict with others, from my micro relationships to macro relationships, and so on. Um, what I seek above all is to know not the science of you know um, political governance, or the science of uh, educational governance per se, even though all of these are related to it, and all of I think it all looks to each other, but really maybe the human science of how I'm to steer this existence that's been given to me, or that I find myself with. How do I make the most of it? How do I bring a source of sense of equilibrium to all my human senses and all my human feelings that I'm constantly going through, enduring, sometimes I feel putting up with, perhaps, right? And in that respect, I do want a manual that will be applicable uh, to me at all points in my time, not something that applies to me just in childhood, or just in my adolescence or elderly age, but right now and in all times to come, that sets out for me a path in which I can feel a sense of sturdiness, firmness, unyieldingness, um, in terms of how I approach things, and how I approach people, and how I approach myself. So let me just go on to the next page. Um, And it's interesting here, I guess, that Nursi is saying that, you know, when we think of Ahl al-Kitab as mentioned in the Quran, one way to think about it is directly just people of the book of the Jewish and Christian traditions. But here it's also saying it could mean, you know, people of modern science books or people of all these various ideologies, people who are relying on different sources to provide guidance for themselves and for others. Um, and so let me pause there before I continue. See if there are any questions or comments so far about what the text has said, and also what maybe I've said, shared along those lines. I'll just give it a moment, and if not, I can continue on a bit more. And it says, I guess, okay, never mind. That was a moment. So let me give the floor to Abdulaziz, inshallah, and then afterwards, I think Abdurrahman also had a hand up.
Assalamu alaikum. So one thought I had about this use of Quran, and that it's valid for every time, is that I think the challenges we face or we supposedly face now to have to be convinced that Quran fit our current time versus people, let's say 1300 years ago, I just don't agree with that argument. I think there are just as many distractions in the past as we do have right now in the moment. Like as someone said before, it's like it's the clouds. Like the blue sky is there, and there are different clouds. Maybe right now we have our own clouds, but at least personally, I believe that as a humans, we always have those clouds, and they will be there, and we are in need of that guidance behind those clouds. We just need to look for it and put the appropriate effort to find it. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just so I understand what you were saying correctly, you're saying that the sort of human problems that we face are going to be faced by, you know, all people of all time, either from this century or
yeah
centuries before. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think you know, it's a, I remember getting into like a not an argument, but just like a disagreement with someone over this of the universality of human experience, you know. And I don't know if there is a way to so and so called, you know, prove a sort of intersubjective shared human experience of feelings and thoughts. But you know, if there's humans from a couple centuries ago that are humans like me, then yeah, they'll also experience the same sort of uh, situations, internal situations, and conflicts that I face in myself. And I think for me, that's very straightforward. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that shows that in some respect, then uh, the guidance that is offered is very can very readily so be the same type of guidance that speaks to someone a couple centuries before me. You know, if they're faced with the same human problems that I face. Um, like yeah, if we look at it in terms of more these external spheres of governance and law and things like that, there is that change, but there might not be that much really, again, quote unquote, change when it comes to just the human experience of emotions and thoughts and states of being. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Abdurrahman, if you still have a comment, you can feel free to make it.
I had a question regarding the sentence, but the rulings and laws of the Quran are so firm and well-founded that they increase in strength as the centuries pass. I'm just trying to understand what he's saying and how I can actually agree with the sentence. Like if we're taking the Quran to be making predictions of science, like for example, about mountains or the sun, or about how there will be so many calamities or things like this. Is this why it's getting stronger? Because now 1400 years have passed and we can now come to some conclusions that, oh, the Quran made statements that now we see are true. Like it made statements about how a child is born in the mother's womb, and this was science that they didn't have access to back then, but now we can verify this, and its claim is stronger. Is this the strength we're talking about? And if this is what the strength we're talking about, still I wouldn't say it's very strong in the sense, I mean, it's not acknowledged as strong by the scientific community. It doesn't have a strength in that field at all. If we're talking about strength in understanding, maybe, like, I think maybe he might be meaning that, like, understanding the Quran might be better, but I'm not sure how that's true either. Like, if anyone has any idea of how the Quran has gotten stronger, or what he means by this claim has been getting stronger, I would appreciate it if you could let me or help me understand.
Thanks for that question. Well, questions in the air. Anyone want to respond to it? Or anyone who has similar questions or comment that could at least help or be alongside that sort of idea? Okay, well, it seems like, oh, okay. So let's go with, all right, the very clear tactic by Brother Yusuf. So let's go with H. Beza first and then Brother Yusuf after.
Assalamu alaikum. I didn't catch the beginning of the class, or the discussion, so apologies for that. But I think in response to the question that was just posed, it's interesting because that was the first thing that came to my mind as Abdul Rahman was kind of unpacking it. But I like being that, in terms of like technology or technological advance or sciences, whatever, things like that. But I guess the one thing that kind of makes a bit more sense to me, and this is just like right off the top of my head, is just that it's the Quran's continual relevancy throughout humanity since it's been revealed, that the guidance in it continues to be of relevance, of benefit, of continues to address human existential dilemmas, and provides guidance despite the changing of the times and technologies and whatnot. So I guess like the fact of the changing of despite the changing of circumstances, it's continual relevancy. I guess that's just an initial thought.
So, yeah, it might be a repetition of what H. Beza just said, but Abdurrahman's question was rightfully asking it from the point of view of science and technology, which seems to be the most important thing in this day and age. And we think it is very different than previous ages. But actually, it was always some sort of science and technology which was really defining the strong nations. So it was really at the center of people's world. So in a sense, it was always there, more or less. But the problem is it central to human experience? Or is it just a tool? And as H. Beza was saying, there are much more central problems of human And we are just trying to cure those problems by using different techniques. And this is why actually we are developing technology, trying to either amuse ourselves, or we think that life is hard because of physical obstacles, and we are trying to improve better tools to make life easier for ourselves, although it is questionable whether we are making it easier or tougher. But the fundamental question is the solution really in here? And is the type of answer that the Quran suggesting is in here? Or shall I expect Quran to answer the question as science and technology is trying to answer those questions? Because apparently, as we get richer or we have more gadgets to play with, we are not getting happier or more satisfied. So this is why I guess if we take human as our reference here, human in the sense that how much human is satisfied, problems of human is solved, then in this regard, Quran's points are eternal and as valid as the first day. But I guess our problem today is we think as if, since it's being shown or depicted in the media, social media or media, that science is the thing, technology is the thing. And since we do not find such like clear mathematical formulas in the Quran, which says, oh, this is how you're going to get to the Mars and come up with this sort of a rocket to go there, so on and so forth. We might feel like, well, it's not up to date in this regard. But yeah, I guess it's a matter of defining what is my reference point in here. Is it the basic and existential problems, questions of human, or daily questions or problems that we come up with as if to solve those existential problems?
Thank you both for those comments. I don't know if they were helpful, Abdurrahman. But if anyone else or anyone has other questions related or unrelated to that, they could feel free to raise their hand and pose it. Brother Birkan, please go ahead.
Jazakallah khairan. Do you mind if you go back and show us the sentence before? Yeah. So it says, men's works and laws grow old like men. They change and are changed. But the rulings and the laws of the Quran are so firm and well-funded that they become even, increase in strength as the centuries pass. So I guess there's a contrast here between what we try to do as people and what is given us as a guidance. And maybe we should understand this sentence within this context, like this comparison. So for instance, we think that, the strategy or in military conflict is the most important thing that a nation should have. Let's say that's what we thought sorry, a few centuries ago. And people, nations, they developed in this regard and had perfect military strategies, but then failed. They somehow destroyed and replaced. And then we thought, the nations, those people should get developed in economy or in cultural influence or in whatever, right? The things change. What has power, what doesn't have power, what is strong, what is weak. It always changes across centuries. We try to decide what is the most powerful thing in human life, in nature, in universe, and our understanding of this power, the strength, changes, because whatever we try to attribute strength, we see next moment that it fails. So when it comes to humans, the people's verbs and the laws, their makings of the universe, it always grow old, change, and are changed. But when it comes to revelation, when it comes to guidance from the maker of the universe, we see that it doesn't change. Even when we look at, sorry, when we look at the different versions of the revelation, different versions of guidance throughout the history, even before Quran, whatever left for our consideration, we see that there is something common there that captures, as the previous people who spoke mentioned, there is this human condition that doesn't change, that doesn't change, and the guidance to guide human, to save human from its condition, from her condition, and to carry her to a better place, at the better state, a better condition. It doesn't change, we see. And when we make this comparison, we understand how powerful it is. And our understanding of strength, our understanding of how powerful it is, how powerful this guidance is, increases as we experience more candidates to be called as powerful or strength. Sorry, having strength, as it changes, as they change, as more candidates come and more candidate goes, we realize more and more how powerful the guidance from the maker of the universe is, how powerful it is. So our understanding of its strength increases because we witness more and more changes. We try different things in place of guidance. We say a few centuries ago, or maybe even less, people wouldn't take science as the prime source of navigation in the universe, right? They would say philosophy. Even the scientists of that time, they would be called as the philosophy of nature. At the same time, or before that, maybe people would call religion, whatever it means to them, as the prime source of navigation, the GPS of that time. And it changed. The religion, as it is mentioned, like as it is being sold to people in the form that it is accepted, now it's not accepted anymore. And then philosophy. Nowadays, people do not even, even philosophers take philosophy as something that should be changed, and so that it would be more similar to science. So its glory, it's not there anymore. And today everyone thinks that the science is the most powerful thing. And we already have this glimpse of change that it's coming, because people now talking about these spiritual things. They say, oh yeah, science maybe is true, maybe it's good, but human needs something else, and we found it within human itself, they would say. The point is, everything is changing. Every candidate waiting to be called as powerful, as a strengthful, I don't know if there's such a word, sorry, having strength is changing. But there's one thing, the guidance, we're still studying verses of Quran. Among us, there are philosophers, scientists, spiritual people, or the people without much title but a lot of the mental power or spiritual power, whatever you want to call. These people are still studying the same verses and extracting more and more meanings. And compared to all these different things that change, old school religion, philosophy, science, spirituality, every candidate for guidance, only one survives. And our, again, understanding of its strength increases as we see others fail. That's how I see for now, at least, but it might be not complete.
Thank you, Brother Birkan, for sharing those comments with us. Yeah, I think, in many ways, and this isn't meant to be reductive, but in just at least one way, the Quran can act like a book of psychology in that it reads human psychology, and it can reveal our own tendencies and behaviors to ourselves. And I guess in one respect, because I don't think it's useful to read the Quran as a source of being firm in terms of showing yet undiscovered scientific discoveries or anything like that. But it can show at least its, as everyone else has said, enduring relevance to the human condition. I would say Shakespeare also shows its enduring relevance to the human condition, but maybe not as comprehensively. Abdurrahman, you have a hand up.
Thank you for your comments. They're very helpful. I just wanted to repeat one thing that I guess stuck with me and understanding how the strength of it is increasing. In this day and age, perhaps because of technology and social media and just being able to disperse information much easier, there's just, let's say, a lot of answers are being given. There's similar to what Brikon was saying, but there's like so many different lines of thought. There's so many different people who have answers or who try to tell you this is how you should live or why you should live. And you have commercials and advertisements and workplaces. Everything is just kind of trying to lead you down a certain path and tell you, this is how you need to live your life, and this is what will give you happiness. And maybe now, in all these false answers or all these things that don't satisfy me, this Quran gains strength because when you read it or you study it, you see that these other things that have been given to you or that people are trying to call you towards, they can't stand up to the firmness that the Quran has beneath it. They can't stand up to the truth that the Quran may portray, because the Quran explains to you yourself, and you may think other things because of what the current popular culture is, or you may follow a certain path or try to live a certain way because of the current popular culture, how you see other people living. But then you see that that way of life potentially doesn't actually help you. It doesn't actually solve your life problems, and you're just thinking, what's going to help me. And in this case, there's like the nur or the light of the Quran, can be something that could be even brighter than it was before, because it's so dark. Maybe it's because it's so dark that this light now becomes even brighter. It becomes even stronger as the centuries pass, because there's a lot more false, there's a lot more dishonesty potentially. That's how I'm understanding it. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdurrahman, for your comments. All right, let me go on a little bit further, but obviously you guys can speak up whenever you feel like it. So here it had said, for example, modern civilization. No, okay, I hadn't read this actually. So let me read this part. For example, modern civilization, which is the product of the thought of all mankind, and perhaps the jinn as well, has taken up a position opposed to the Quran, which individuals and communities have failed to dispute. So, civilization as we know it right now, it says has a stance that is directly in opposition to that of the Quran, although they have failed to dispute the Quran. With its sorcery, it impugns the Quran's miraculousness. Now, in order to prove the claim of the verse, say if the whole of mankind and the jinns were to gather together. And that's part of the verse from chapter 17, verse 88. We shall compare the foundations and principles which civilization has laid in the form of dispute with the principles of the Quran. So, principles or matters in which there has been a sort of direct, I guess, difference of, I wouldn't even say opinion, but just different, direct opposition to what the Quran has offered as guidance. So it says, at the first degree, the comparisons and balances which form all the words from the 1st to the 25th, and the verses at their heads which form their truths, all prove with the certainty that 2 + 2 = 4, the Quran's miraculousness and superiority in the face of civilization. I don't know, maybe it's not obvious to me, but I'm kind of failing to get at what it's saying here. If anyone has an idea, please speak up. Comparisons and balances which form all the words from the 1st to the 25th, and the verses at their heads which form their truths, all prove. Okay, I mean, all right, so rereading always helps. So I mean, Imam Nursi is here saying that so far everything that has been said so far in the words of the Risale, which have all been commentaries and a way of explaining Quranic verses, all of them, he says, show up to this point with certainty the Quran's not only miraculousness, but certain superiority over human thought and human civilization. And the ways in which the guidance it offers is definitely, I wouldn't even say superior because that's a relative term, but that its guidance is what the human spirit requires. Brother Yusuf, please go ahead.
Especially in the earlier words, maybe until the 11th, 12th word, the author has a style in which he is comparing two people, two mindsets. And when we think about these two mindsets, actually, one of them is representing today's perspective, which is there's no purpose, no meaning in life, or my purpose in life is just to maximize my joys or my personal gains. So it's not really alien to us. He is explaining this just in a very easy, like story-like fashion, but it's pretty much representing today's perspective. Then in response to that, he puts another guy, a good guy. And then in this way of explaining, actually, what he's doing is he's comparing today's this civilization's mindset, which is, as he says, a congregation of like thousands of years of thought, and compares it with Quran's perspective, and honestly says, put yourself you are these two people. You are either in one way or in the other way. Which one is more satiating, more satisfactory to yourself? So, and in here, he is briefly referring to these, of course, during this discussion, we cannot go back to those texts and see if this is really the case. But from our previous discussions, many of the people in here are familiar with the text. We know that these sort of comparisons is what has been written so far. And I guess here the author is putting it as a proof to support his claim.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf. That was very helpful. Thank you. So that's at the first degree. At the second degree, the text says, like the proofs in the 12th word, and okay, the 12th word had been what I had recalled from this first degree as well. Like the proofs in the 12th word, it is to summarize a number of principles. By reason of its philosophy, present-day civilization accepts force as the point of support in the life of society. It takes as its aim benefits and considers the principle of its life to be conflict. It considers the bond between communities to be racialism and negative nationalism. I wonder if there's a better translation for these words. I'm not sure what the original says, but while its aim is to provide amusements for gratifying the appetites of the soul and increasing man's needs. However, the mark, and then provide amusements. I mean, that's what we see with technology as well, right? Endless distraction, but also endless addiction and need for that distraction. However, the mark of force is aggression, and since the benefits are insufficient to meet all needs, their mark is that everyone tussles and jostles over them. The mark of conflict is contention, and the mark of racialism, aggression, since it thrives on devouring others. Thus, it is because of these principles of civilization that despite all its virtues, it has provided a sort of superficial happiness for only 20% of mankind and cast 80% into distress and poverty. I would say that's a generous percentage. I would say it's much more of a vivid imbalance than just 20% and 80%. But I don't know if that's a new hand, Brother Yusuf. If so, you can go ahead. Okay, it's not. No problem. Yeah, here, I guess it's a sort of diagnosis of the state of present day. I mean, his present day civilization is also, I think, very much so applicable to our present day civilization. And, you know, we do see that the reign of one economic system, let's say capitalism, is at least the way in which it is implemented and designed and so forth. There's a mass sort of discontent over the distribution of wealth, right? Over class conflict, over what unites people in a nation versus what divides them. And the principles, as it states here, of force, benefit, conflict, right, are principles that run contrary to the guidance provided by the Quran. But through these sort of premises, or the conclusion is that we have a society that thrives through devouring others. You know, just at a very, let's say, the weapon industry, you know, just in a very literal sense, is brings immense wealth to some people while devouring others. The way in which profits are made, labor division is made. All of these things, you know, I think what Nursi is highlighting here are things that we can, or what any sociologist would consider to be true. maybe not necessarily in this language, but at least I can, say, yeah, that's true in my own perspective. Brother Yusuf, I think that's a new hand, so I'll give it to
Actually, very recently, in our weekly meeting in our research lab, one of our friends who is quite new, I would say, to these domains, made a presentation. So in our weekly meetings, we either present a journal paper or some presentation of whatever content we would like. So that friend, he came across a paper from a very high reputational lab, and he realized that they are faking it. And he was quite upset because he was not, like, he considered scientific community to be a virtuous community. So he was quite shaken. So he then dig a little bit deeper if this is something widespread. But he said he couldn't find any paper about this. But he came across a few blog writings, and he shared it with us. The title of that presentation was 7 Deadly Sins of Science. So when reading through what Nursi is listing in here, it reminded me of this presentation of 7 Deadly Sins of Science. Like the conflicts or force, these are not only happening at the level of like society, like the states, but also within even a small scientific environment in which supposedly the most virtuous people of the society, quote unquote, are trying to develop new techniques for the betterment of people. This is how it sounds, or it is supposed to be. But when I look at this list, for instance, so force is the point of support. So, I mean, unfortunately, wherever is the money coming from, for example, you have to do your research in that avenue, and you need to please the sources of money, like the granting agencies. So, and then you need to sugarcoat your findings according to their expectations, no matter your results are true or not. So this is being this way or that way encouraged, although it is being discouraged verbally. But when it comes to practice, since people are competing for this many of limited amount of money, and money is the thing that you need to get, so you need to be strong, you need to hire more people to make more research, and so on and so forth. Force is the thing that everybody is running after. And then as a result comes like conflict. So you're saying that how can we improve more publication? I mean, it could have been ideally in an ideal world in which people are collaborating in a friendly manner, but it's also happening that people are being like pushed so that people are going to compete with each other in the expense of putting the other one down to rise up. So like, or benefit at the end of the day, is the goal to solve the problems, or is the goal to produce more publication to get more money, more funding? Because or even more important than money, the glory that it's going to bring with. So the benefits are being put in there rather than truly helping people. And in that presentation, our friend was quoting that blog writing in which it's saying that sensational research, you are doing research in sensational topics because you need more citation, you need more media coverage, so that you're going to become more like known in the domain, so that you're going to get your next grant application is going to go through. So long story short, this is ideally the most quote unquote virtuous community, or supposed to be the most virtuous community, but still this system is all over the place. It's among the states, it's within the scientific community. And at the end of the day, I observe this conflict, aggression, or like people are just producing results, sometimes closing their eyes to what would be the outcome, whether it's right or wrong. I mean, I know it's going to be wrong, so let me not look at their sort of an attitude is there. So I think it's all over the place.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf. Brother Birkan, you can have the mic.
Selamun alaikum again. Part which says it considers the bond between communities to be racialism and negative nationalism. My guess, only reason he put negative here, not to say that some kind of nationalism is good, but rather probably, I'm just guessing, the author was separating the word nationalism as it goes to, as it understood when we say nation of Abraham versus any kind of nationalism that we experience today. So again, my guess, he's not trying to say, oh yeah, Turkish nationalism is good, but not Arab nationalism, or Arab nationalism is good, but not, the Western nationalism. I guess the negative nationalism is there just to put the emphasis on the difference between nation of Abraham or nation of Israel, let's say, versus nationalism as we understood, which is altogether negative nationalism. But the part that I want to highlight is, like when we look at the sentence, it's talk about the bond between communities. On the left-hand side, we have something positive, like bonded communities, the people coming together, doing something together, benefiting from each other, helping each other, whatever. That's what we see. That's what we aim. But on the right-hand side, it says it is rationalism and nationalism. So something good equals to something bad. And this is how the current present-day civilization run, how it's operated, or how it operates. He says, to me, this is really interesting because, for instance, with the Yusuf's example, he gave us something bad, right? People fighting to each other. Fighting to each other, having some conflicts, or pretending to be good but doing something terrible, whatever. This is a bad example that we observe. But at the same time, there are some good examples, right? The people nowadays talking about diversity, people nowadays talking about individual rights, how some certain groups actually matter. Their lives are virtuous, their lives matter, and so on and so forth. So it seems there is an improvement there. It seems there's a social improvement in our lives, that regardless of your background, regardless of your personal attributions, the identity, regardless of your identity, you are protected, you are safe, and you come together with other people with different identities, with different attributions, and then do something together in a synergetic way, which is great. But author says, if you look at this greatness from a philosophical perspective, or if you like to construct such a greatness, if you try to construct such a greatness by following the philosophical perspective, he says, you will first rely on rationalism, you will accept different races, you will accept different identities, even you will go further and you will try to define new identities. Every individual will have his or her own identity, all own properties, own definition, which is completely different than any other. You will accept the differences, and you will try to define something good based on these differences. You will first divide and then say that, yes, you are separate entities. I'm sorry, but black people are not same with white people, but we should respect them as well. That's the approach. That the people wouldn't talk about humans. They will talk about white humans, black humans, brown humans, the Turkish people, Arab people, I don't know, the Japanese people, Muslim people, Christian people. They are all separate entities. There is no way to talk about commonalities. They are separate, but they have to learn how to live together. Separation, division is the basic thing, the fundamental thing that defines us, they would say. We should accept this, and we should construct our society based on these differences. How to accommodate these differences, they would say. Or we will say, when trying to construct something good, the bond between communities. So this is the way the present day civilization works. This is how diversity, for instance, or the identity politics operates. First divide and make people accept these divisions. It is, for instance, nowadays forbidden to say that, but we are talking about people, like we should talk about commonalities. They would claim, they would, blame you disregarding the differences, disregarding cultural values. They will blame you for being disrespectful of the cultural differences or cultural background of people. You have to accept the differences. You have to play your game based on differences. Rationalism and nationalism. This is one thing. Another thing, I guess, author making a more fundamental comment here, rather than just criticizing what's going on in science or other circles, that they are the people who have conflict within or don't care anything other than benefits. But as religious people, we are different. I guess this is not the case. So as a religious person, when you look at this scene, when you look at the people publishing things, having fight or whatever, what do you see there? When you look at them, what do you see? Do you define what you see as a matter of force, as a product of force, conflict, benefits? Do you interpret your experiences based on these keywords? Or do you interpret the same experience as something coming from your Lord and trying to teach you something out of mercy, out of truth? So it is the easy thing, like I always do it, right? I look at these different circles and I say that all they do is fight. All they do is lie. How our system is constructed, how our system works, I would say, right? It's based on force, conflict, benefit, whatever. So this is how I interpret. And then I claim that I'm the religious one. But this is the same thing they would say. They would say, yes, the present day civilization is based on force, benefit, conflict, and we're trying to regulate them in the best way. Nobody then, neither me or neither I or them, or they, sorry, none of them, none of us would talk about how this experience of people having some conflict is actually coming from my Lord out of truth and mercy. to teach me something. So I guess seeing the problem is one thing. How people interpret the same thing in a wrong way and articulating is one thing. But giving an alternative, mentioning an alternative is another thing. So where we are located, that's the question. Am I also look at the current century, how people interact with each other, what I experience, and conclude that life is full of the conflict and is run by force. Is it my conclusion? If this is my conclusion, this is a philosophical conclusion. I'm sorry. Just because I criticize unbelievers, it doesn't make my interpretation, my understanding any religious. It's a secular criticism of a secular society. So when and how are we going to become religious? I guess the second paragraph will teach us how to become religious, how to follow Quranic wisdom and interpret the same society. Even though we see all these bad things, same society, same conflicts, how to interpret them, not based on force, but based on truth and mercy. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you, Brother Birkan, for those comments and for that nice segue into the second paragraph. So let's read that, inshallah. The wisdom of the Quran, however, takes as its point of support truth instead of force, and in place of benefit has virtue and God's pleasure as its aims. Truth as its point of support, and virtue and God's pleasure as its aims. It considers the principle of mutual assistance to be fundamental in life rather than conflict. In the ties between communities, it accepts the bonds of religion, class, and country in place of racialism and nationalism. This could use for some explaining. Its aims are to place a barrier before the illicit assaults of the soul's base appetites and to urge the spirit to sublime matters, to satisfy man's elevated emotions and encourage him towards the human perfections. As for the truth, its mark is concord, the mark of virtue is mutual support, and the mark of mutual assistance, hastening to help one another. The mark of religion is brotherhood and attraction, and the result of reining in and tethering the evil commanding soul and leaving the spirit despite the virtues present-day civilization has acquired from the guidance of the Quran in particular. Let me reread that. I think I skipped the line. The mark of religion is brotherhood and attraction, and the result of reining in and tethering the evil commanding soul and leaving the spirit free and urging it towards perfection is happiness in this world and the next. Thus, despite the virtues present-day civilization has acquired from the guidance of the Quran in particular, and from the preceding revealed religions, in point of fact, it has thus suffered defeat before the Quran. So now we have, as Brother Birkan called it, how to be religious. The Quranic principles that permeate its vision of society and how the human being, what path the human being puts herself in to conduct her behavior, actions, choices, and so forth. So the point of support being truth and virtue and God's pleasure as being aims is, we can talk about it, but that makes sense to me. We could talk a bit about mutual assistance, the principle of mutual assistance, how I'm supposed to understand that. How is that fundamental in life as opposed to conflict? Can there be progress, whatever progress is, through this principle of mutual assistance rather than conflict? And then it would be useful for me if someone explained a bit how bonds of religion, class, and country are a lot better than racialism and nationalism. In one respect, that just seems a different way of saying nationalism still, or class. You know, one's first instinct to hearing that is that it's outdated. So what does it mean by class? What does it mean by country? How are we to understand that? And by all means, what does it mean by religion, by that very mean word? And then here it talks about things that I can perhaps find more relatable in terms of myself and being a human being. That that the Quranic principles aim to place a barrier between the illicit assaults of the soul's base appetites and to urge the spirit to sublime matters. And this is in order to satisfy the emotions and the urge I have towards human perfection. And so there's a little bit more, but I'm interested in what others have to say. I guess it's also saying by the end of the paragraph that there are some virtues that present day civilization has retained or carried on from the revealed books, revealed religions, but that in all of these other ways, it, current civilization is perhaps a civilization of decay and demise, whereas what is being explained here as Quranic principles are not. And I guess one question that I also have is, all of this sounds great, but one of the points of contention that many people have, and as I read this earlier today, that I had was when reading about things like this is, how can we know something that sounds so ideal in in words is truly and very much so applicable to human society? So this can be said for certain ideologies that, let's say instead of capitalism, another ideology that if it was carried out in its ideal sense, in its ideal form of theory, that it would bring about an ideal society. But then others say, well, it's not possible to implement such an ideal theory because it's just against human nature, let's say. And so, of course, when it comes to Quranic principles, one has to acknowledge the source, right, of this speech, which is the creator of myself, humans, and by necessity, whoever has created me has also given me my human nature and would know what is possible, what is best, what is ideal, what is implementable for that human nature, human being. But even if I do acknowledge that, are these Quranic principles? How can I confirm, perhaps, beyond just logical necessity? How can I confirm in a practical sense that they could be so implementable in society? Because if they're not implementable in society, then I don't have a point of even comparing and contrasting practical reality with another practical reality. It's easier to compare two different, let's say, theories, quote unquote, rather than two practical realities if one of them has not occurred yet. Unless, one makes the argument that it did occur, but that was at the time of the prophet and so on. So, those are just my 2 cents, just in terms of questions that this paragraph has me thinking about. But, we are coming to the end of our time slowly, but we still have a couple minutes to talk about this. So if anyone has any thoughts, either in regard to what I said or not necessarily in regard to what I said, but just in terms of what the paragraph is talking about, then please feel free to make a comment or raise a question. Okay. Brother Yusuf, please go ahead.
So I guess other than giving a historical evidence, I don't know how else we can talk about it. And since I'm not an expert of history, I don't know if I can give a convincing answer to the question that you are asking. But I guess the available answer that I might experience, other than the one that you were saying, like at the time of the messenger, this is what was practically applied and the happiness was lived. And also in throughout the ages, some Muslim groups, state, societies, whatever, to a certain extent, to the extent that they were heeding Quran, they were experiencing this to a certain extent. These can be claimed. But in my personal life, can I get glimpses of it so that I'm going to say, well, to the extent that I see this being applied, I enjoyed it a lot. And then I can imagine how great it would be if it was applied widespread. And I think I am experiencing this when I see certain people, for example, you can name those people in your lives. Maybe you have such people around you, or maybe certain groups are more living or experiencing such brotherhood or mutual assistance and whatnot in their lives under the understanding of the fear of God or the consciousness of God. So, for example, I have known such people, I lived with them, and of course, nothing was ideally perfect in there or in anywhere. But when contrasted with the society that we are living in, I say this is way better. And yes, I can identify such problems even in that much better group. But still, these are because of our deviations from the truth. So the problem is on me, not in the theory. And I can see that it could have been better, or in certain environments, I'm observing that, especially around certain people. And by certain people, not to make it too vague, let's say, so in my personal life, when I was seeing the first-hand students of Nursi himself, I was sensing that they are as if people from a different, I don't know, realm. And the people living around them were having a life that is more, I would say, consistent, and that appeared to be more peaceful. And to the extent that I was sharing the same environment with them, the same social environment with them, I was having a much more consistent life, for example. So this was giving me the impression that to the extent that I get, if you like, the smell of prophethood, because prophethood means that theory being applied in life. So to the extent that I taste the smell of prophethood in my life, I was seeing that, and I am still seeing that it is way more satisfactory, much more fitting to my human nature, and much more peaceful. And is it practical? I do observe that it is being practical to the extent of how well we are obeying or taking the message serious. And not only its theory is serious, but trying to put it into practice serious. So this gives me a very strong conviction in terms of what the author is saying in here. But if I'm not in such an environment, of course, I'm going to look for, to whatever extent I can observe this in practice. But as you said, if that practice is not accessible to me, then the only thing that's left to me is to compare the theories, the two theories, and to what extent they would apply to my human nature, because my human nature is accessible to me. But then I need to be very honest in here and say which one fits my humanity better.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf. That was really helpful. And I think you're right in that we can get glimpses, rays, just tastes perhaps of it within our own states and sometimes within the circumstances that we're put in, which act as indicators, signposts to it perhaps. So that was helpful for me. So I'm going to end it here, inshallah. For next week, next week's moderator can start at the third degree, but if people have questions here, they can also maybe wrap it up and then start from the third degree. Brother Birkan, go ahead.
I'd like to just say one thing very quick. Your question, so I don't have an answer to that. When you ask why author is talking about the country or class and how it is better than rationalism and nationalism. So again, I don't have the answer, but one thing I guess we shouldn't forget. So this paragraph is about how Quran defines things, how Quran guides us when it comes to these social relationships or about anything. So if author is saying, for instance, let me see this sentence, sorry. In place of rationalism and nationalism, it accepts the bonds of religion, class, and country. So author says Quran accepts the bonds of religion, class, and country. So then we should ask the question, does Quran talk about countries or classes? So it must be a concept, it must be a word from Quran. Otherwise, author wouldn't say Quran says that. So whatever it's said here, class or country, we should look at Quran and see how Quran defines country, how Quran defines class. What does it mean to say the bonds of class or bonds of country? That's the only thing I would say. Like, I don't know the answer how Quran defines class or what class means from a Quranic perspective. I don't know. But the only thing I know, it must be something different than I would use as, like, you know, in India, there are different castes or different classes. But I don't remember such a mention in Quran. So it must be something different than this.
Thank you, Brother Birkan. I think that's an important point. and it had kind of occurred to me a little bit, but I wasn't sure if I was kind of overthinking it. But yeah, I think you're right that we shouldn't project our own definitions, but be willing to explore the Quranic definitions that the speech offers in itself, and hopefully that can be done another time, another moment. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here and participating, listening. Early Eid Mubarak, since Eid is this coming week. I hope everyone has one that is full of God consciousness and full of state of security and peace. Inshallah, let's end it here today. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعوانا